He was their strength, their shield against the world. But when sickness came and hope began to slip through their fingers, a mother gave everything. A sister sacrificed everything just to keep him alive. But life had other plans. What happens when the one who holds a family together is gone? Let's find out. The sun had barely risen over the village, but already the air was thick with tension. In the tiny hut that sat on the outskirts of the village, Mama Nkechi sat beside her eldest son, Ugo, her heart heavy with worry. Ugo was the oldest of 4 children. He was smart, funny, and strong, the kind of child every mother prayed for. He wanted to be a doctor, not just for the prestige, but because he hated seeing people suffer. His mother, Mama Nkechi, sold vegetables at the roadside. His father had passed years ago, so Ugo became the man of the house early. He helped his siblings with homework, fetched water, and sometimes even missed school to assist his mother. But life, as it often does, took a sharp turn. One rainy season, Ugo started coughing. At first, it was nothing serious, but then came the fever, the weight loss, the weakness. They went from one herbalist to another and then to the health center miles away. The diagnosis? Tuberculosis. But by the time they found out, it had advanced. Treatment cost money they didn't have. Mama Nkechi sold her small plot of land. Ugo's younger brother stopped school. His sister began hawking groundnuts after school. Everyone sacrificed. But now, Ugo lay helpless in bed, his face pale and drawn. His body trembled with fever, his breath shallow and labored. The village healer had tried everything she knew, but nothing had worked. The herbal mixtures, the prayers, and even the special charms to ward off evil had all failed. Mama Nkechi wiped her eyes, fighting back tears. "Ugo, my son, please, you can't leave us. You're all we have. You promised you'd take care of us," she whispered, her voice cracking. Ugo opened his eyes for a brief moment and smiled weakly. "Mama, I'll try, but I can't promise anything." His words were so soft, almost lost in the sound of his shallow breathing. But Mama Nkechi knew that the promise of hope she had clung to was slipping away, and it terrified her. They had no money, no resources, and nowhere to turn. Days passed, and Ugo's condition only worsened. The family watched helplessly as he grew weaker, his once powerful hands now frail and limp. His younger siblings, Chika, Ngozi, and Ifeanyi, had never seen their brother like this. They gathered around his bed, not daring to speak, their faces filled with the fear of what they could not bear to face. It was Chika, the second eldest, who finally broke the silence. "Mama, what if we take him to the city? Maybe someone there can help him. Maybe they have better doctors who can save him." Mama Nkechi looked at Chika, her face twisted with uncertainty. The city was far, and it would cost money they didn't have. But her heart clenched at the thought of losing her son, her only hope for the future. "What money do we have, Chika?" she asked, her voice laced with sorrow. "How can we afford the journey? How can we afford treatment?" Just then, Ngozi entered the room, holding a small leather pouch. Her eyes were swollen from crying, but she managed to speak. "Mama, look, we found this." She opened the pouch, revealing a bundle of crisp notes, money they hadn't seen in years. Mama Nkechi's breath caught in her throat. Was this the miracle they had been waiting for? She felt a spark of hope, faint but real. "We can take him to the city," she whispered. "We'll do whatever it takes. If this money can save you, Ugo, then we will do it." The day they set out for the city was one of the hardest days Mama Nkechi had ever known. She had no idea how they had managed to scrape together the money for the journey, but somehow they had. With Ugo resting in the back of the old truck they borrowed from a distant relative, the family began the long, painful journey to the city. As they drove through the rough roads, Ugo's condition continued to decline. He lay motionless, his once strong body now barely able to lift itself. The rhythmic bumps of the road did nothing to ease his pain. Mama Nkechi held his hand the entire journey, praying silently with each passing hour. "We're almost there, Ugo. Just hold on," she whispered, though even she knew the chances were slim. Ugo's eyes fluttered open again. "Mama, I'm tired," he said, his voice weak. Mama Nkechi squeezed his hand. "No, my son, you are strong. You can do this." But deep inside, she knew that the road ahead would be long, and she couldn't help but wonder if it was already too late. When they finally reached the city, the bustling streets and bright lights overwhelmed the family. Everything was new and foreign to them. The city was nothing like their village, where time seemed to stand still. Here it was fast-paced, crowded, and loud. Mom and Nkechi felt small, almost invisible in the sea of people. They made their way to the hospital, where the doctor's office was located. The staff rushed around, barely giving them a second glance as they hurried to find a bed for Ugo. "Please, help us," Mom and Nkechi pleaded, her voice breaking. "My son is sick. He needs help." The doctor, a kind-looking man in his 50s, examined Ugo and sighed heavily. "I'm sorry, but his condition is critical. It might be too late for any treatment." Mama and Nkechi's heart dropped. She had hoped against hope that this would be their salvation. But now she could hear the harsh reality in the doctor's words. "Please, save him," she begged. The doctor shook his head. "I'm afraid we can't do much at this stage. We'll try what we can, but you must prepare yourself for the worst." Hours passed, but there was no improvement. Mama and Nkechi and the children waited outside the doctor's office, praying silently. Every minute felt like an eternity. The rhythmic ticking of the clock seemed to mock their desperation. Chika and Ngozi sat huddled together, tears staining their faces. They hadn't spoken in what felt like forever as the weight of the situation pressed down on them. Ifeanyi, the youngest, was too afraid to speak, his eyes wide and full of confusion. Mama Nkechi paced back and forth, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. She had come so far to save her son, and yet it felt like the world was slipping through her fingers. Every minute she spent waiting felt like a cruel joke. Then, just as the sun began to set, the doctor came out. His face was grim. "I'm sorry," he said. "There's nothing more we can do. Your son, he's too far gone." Mama Nkechi's world shattered. She dropped to her knees, her cry of despair echoing in the sterile hospital hall. No, please. You can't take him from me." Ugo was gone. Mama Nkechi sat by his bedside, clutching his lifeless hand. The tears wouldn't stop. The family had lost their strongest link, the one person who had held them together through the hardest of times. How would they survive now? What would they do without Ugo? Chika stood at the door, her hands shaking. She couldn't bear to look at her brother, her tears falling like rain. "Mama, what do we do now? We're all alone." Mama Nkechi's voice was barely a whisper. "I don't know. My child. I don't know." And in that moment, the world outside the hospital seemed to disappear. All that remained was the grief of a mother who had lost her firstborn and the sobs of siblings who had lost their protector. The funeral was small, held in the city because they had no money to bring him back home, where only a handful of people knew Ugo's name. But to Mama Nkechi and her children, it felt as though the entire world had gone silent. Ugo, their pillar, was gone, and they were left to pick up the pieces. "I didn't want him to leave us," Chika whispered as they stood by the grave site. "He was our everything." Mama Nkechi nodded, her heart heavy with a grief she couldn't name. "Now we must be strong for him. We have to carry on, even though it feels like we can't." As they stood there, a cold wind swept through the cemetery, carrying with it the weight of their loss. The world moved on, but for Mama Nkechi and her children, life would never be the same again. Ugo had been their strength, and now they were left behind. The days that followed were filled with emptiness. Their home, which had once been filled with laughter and noise, was now eerily quiet. Mama Nkechi tried to keep things normal for the younger children, but it was hard. The house seemed so much smaller without Ugo's presence. Chika sat in Ugo's old room, staring at his things. His clothes were still there, neatly folded, as if he had just stepped out. His shoes were by the door, and his favorite book was lying on the table. "Mama, I miss him," she said softly, holding the book to her chest. "I can't believe he's really gone." Mama Nkechi sat beside her, pulling her into a tight hug. "I miss him too, my daughter. I miss him every day." It wasn't easy. No one knew how to move on without Ugo. They all felt the weight of his absence in different ways, but life had to continue. Mama Nkechi couldn't afford to fall apart. She had to keep going for her children. The weight of responsibility fell heavily on Chika's shoulders after Ugo's death. She could no longer hide behind her younger years, pretending that she didn't have to face the harsh realities of life. As the eldest remaining child, she had to step up. One morning, as Mama Nkechi sat on the porch, staring at the empty horizon, Chika approached her. "Mama, I will take care of the farm. I'll make sure we have food," she said with determination, though her heart ached inside. Mama Nkechi looked up at her daughter, a mixture of pride and sorrow in her eyes. "Chika, my child, you don't have to carry this burden alone." "I know, Mama, but I want to help. Ugo would have wanted me to take care of you," Chika replied, trying to hide the tears threatening to spill. It wasn't easy to take on a role so big, but for her family, she would do it. As the days wore on, Chica's exhaustion began to take its toll. Her shoulders ached and her hands were calloused from the long hours spent in the fields. She couldn't remember the last time she had laughed or felt the joy of a simple day. All she could think about was making sure her family had enough to eat. One night, after putting Ifeanyi and Ngozi to bed, Chika stood by the window, staring out into the night. A heavy silence surrounded her. She could hear her own thoughts echoing, filling the empty space in her heart. "I miss you, Ugo," she whispered to the darkness. "I don't know how to do this without you." The next day, as Chika was working the land, a man from the village came to visit. His name was Nnamdi, and he had heard about Ugo's death and the family's struggles. He was older, and his face was weathered from years of work in the sun. "I've come to help," Nnamdi said, his voice deep and calm. "I know what you're going through. The loss, it's hard." Chika eyed him warily, unsure whether to trust him. "Help us with what?" she asked. "I have some land nearby. I can give you work. It won't be easy, but it's better than nothing. You can sell what you harvest." Chika hesitated. It was a tempting offer, but she wasn't sure if she should accept help from someone she barely knew. "I will think about it," she said, still unsure. Nnamdi nodded, and before he left, he added, "Take care of yourself, Chika. You're doing more than anyone could ask of you." After some thought, Chika decided to take Nnamdi up on his offer. She had nothing to lose, and it seemed like a lifeline. The family could not survive by scraping together what little they had. It was time to take a risk. Mama Nkechi was hesitant at first. "I don't trust that man," she said, wringing her hands. "But if you believe it's a good idea, Chika, then I won't stop you." "I trust him, Mama. I'll be careful." Chika promised, though a part of her was filled with doubt. But what other choice did they have? The next few weeks were grueling, but slowly things began to change. Chika worked alongside Nnamdi, planting crops on the new land. It wasn't easy, but it was a step forward. With each passing day, Chika grew stronger. The work was hard, and there were times when she thought she wouldn't make it, but she never gave up. Her family relied on her now more than ever, and she couldn't afford to let them down. One evening, as Mama Nkechi sat by the fire, she noticed the worn look in Chika's face. "Are you okay, my child?" she asked, her voice gentle, though it trembled with worry. Chika forced a smile. "I'm fine, Mama. I'm just tired. We'll be okay. We have each other." But deep down, Chika wasn't sure. The weight of Ugo's absence and the endless struggle to survive was breaking her down, piece by piece. One night, after a long day of work, Chika sat beside Mama Nkechi, who seemed to have aged years in just a few months. Her once lively face now seemed tired and sorrowful. "Mama, do you ever think we'll be okay again?" Chika asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mama Nkechi looked at her daughter, her eyes full of unspoken pain. "I don't know, Chika, I don't know, but we must keep trying. Ugo wouldn't have wanted us to give up." Chika nodded, her heart heavy. She had lost her brother, the pillar of their family, and yet her mother was right. They had to keep going. For Ugo, for each other. Even as Chika worked tirelessly, Mama Nkechi's sorrow didn't ease. She missed Ugo in ways she couldn't describe. She longed to hear his voice, his laughter, the sound of his footsteps in the house. The absence of him was like a hole in her heart that nothing could fill. One evening, Mama Nkechi sat alone in Ugo's room, running her fingers over his belongings. His shirt was still hanging on the wall, his shoes neatly placed under the bed. She closed her eyes, imagining him walking through the door, his arms wide as he hugged her. "I'm so sorry, Ugo. I couldn't save you," she whispered, tears slipping down her face. The work on Nnamdi's land began to pay off. Slowly but surely the crops began to grow, and for the first time in months the family had enough to eat. They could sell the excess at the market, which meant they could buy clothes and other necessities. But even as things improved, the family could never shake the feeling that something was missing. Ugo's absence was a constant reminder of their loss. One afternoon, as Chika was walking to the market with a basket of produce, she heard a familiar voice calling her name. She turned to see a woman from the village. "Chika, I have something for you," the woman said, handing her a small, wrapped bundle. "This is from Ugo. He gave it to me before he left." Chika's heart skipped a beat. She took the bundle and unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a small pendant, an eagle made of carved wood. It was Ugo's gift to her, something he had promised to give her once she grew older. The tears came immediately. "Ugo, I miss you so much." Even as the family faced hardship after hardship, there was one thing that kept them going: hope. Chika's determination, Mama Nkechi's strength, and the bond between the siblings were all they had left. They held on to that hope, despite the grief that clouded their hearts. "I don't know how to do this, Mama," Chika said one night, sitting beside her mother. "I don't know how to carry on without him." Mama and Nkechi took her daughter's hand. "We will find a way. We have each other, Chika. And Ugo will always be with us, in our hearts." The family continued to rebuild their lives. The shop Chika started began to thrive, and the bond between them grew stronger. Every day was a reminder that they could survive no matter what life threw at them. One evening, as Chika sat by the fire with Mama and Nkechi, Ngozi and Ifeanyi, she realized that the grief that had once been so overwhelming was no longer a burden. It had transformed into something else, something that reminded them every day of Ugo's love, his sacrifices, and his legacy. "I think he would have been proud of us," Chika said quietly. Mama and Nkechi nodded. "I know he would have." And in that moment, the family knew that they had not been left behind. Ugo was always with them, in the strength they had found in each other, in the love that still bound them together, and in the future they were building, one step at a time. Despite all they had gone through, the family was stronger than ever. Chika's shop flourished, and their bond as a family had deepened. They had found a new rhythm in life, and though they still missed Ugo every day, they had learned how to carry him with them in a way that didn't weigh them down. One evening, as they sat down to eat together, Mom and Nkechi looked around the table, her heart full. "We've been through so much," she said, "but we're still here, together." And for the first time in a long while, there was laughter in the house again. The darkness that had once consumed them had faded, and the light of love had returned. The family had survived, they had endured, and now they were whole once more. Years later, Chika stood watching as her younger siblings played in the yard. The house was filled with the sounds of joy, of new life, and the promise of brighter days ahead. The pain of the past still lingered, but it had transformed into something beautiful. Ugo had been the glue that held them together, but they had grown into something even stronger. They were a family, bound not just by blood, but by the love they had learned to give, even in the hardest of times. As Chika watched her family laugh, she smiled. "Ugo, look what we've built," she whispered, knowing that in some way he was still with them, guiding them, loving them, as they moved forward together. Moral lesson. In life, we often face unimaginable challenges that test our strength and resilience. The loss of a loved one can leave a hole in our hearts, but it also reminds us of the strength we have within ourselves and the power of family. Even in the darkest of times, love, hope, and determination can guide us toward healing. Though Ugo was the pillar of his family, it was his love and sacrifices that continued to inspire them long after he was gone. The true strength of a family lies not only in the roles we play, but in how we come together to keep moving forward, even when the weight of loss feels unbearable. It makes me wonder how many of us have had to find our strength in the wake of someone's absence, and how we carry them with us in small, quiet ways. What part of the story spoke to you most? Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, do well to subscribe, like, share, leave a comment, and stay tuned for another thrilling story. Until next time, stay strong, stay hopeful, and keep fighting.